The war in the Middle East is no longer contained. Key oil infrastructure has already been hit, including Kharg Island, Iran's largest export hub, and crude is back above $100. Once a site like that comes under attack, the market stops treating this like a limited clash and starts pricing in a wider supply shock. At the same time, the pressure is spreading far beyond one target. Hormuz is now effectively disrupted, and even partial disruption there is enough to send prices sharply higher and shake confidence across global markets. What makes this more dangerous is the kind of warfare now in play. Iran does not need to match the United States ship for ship. Cheap drones, mines, and long-range missiles can do enough damage or create enough risk to block major naval movement and keep even powerful forces on edge. That is the new reality of asymmetric warfare at sea, and that is why Washington faces a serious problem. Even with the world's strongest navy, reopening Hormuz is not simple, fast, or guaranteed. The United States can strike targets, but securing commercial shipping through a live missile and drone threat is a very different task. So this is already bigger than a short-term market scare. It is a structural energy shock, and once that kind of shock begins, Washington starts looking for ways to spread the burden. Now the White House is doing exactly that. Trump is pressuring China to help deal with the Hormuz crisis, even though this war was triggered by Washington's own escalation. His message is simple: countries that benefit from the strait should help keep it open. But that means pushing other powers into the middle of a conflict they did not start and do not control. That is a very dangerous shift. Once outside countries begin sending ships into an active war zone, the risk changes immediately. A Chinese vessel could be hit by a mine, a NATO ship could be struck by a drone or missile. Even one accidental attack could trigger a much bigger international crisis. The battlefield would no longer be limited to the United States and Iran. It would become a direct test of how far major powers are willing to go. And this is why the pressure on China matters so much. Washington is trying to turn a self-created crisis into shared responsibility. This is not a real burden-sharing plan. It is a way of spreading risk. The United States wants other countries to help clean up the fallout while it keeps control over the military decisions that caused the problem in the first place.
Like, as an example, in many cases, the NATO countries. We're always there for NATO. We're helping them with Ukraine. As many, it's got a notion in between us. Doesn't affect us, but we've helped them. It'd be interesting to see what country wouldn't help us with a very small endeavor, which is just keeping the strait open. That, by comparison.
That pressure is not aimed only at China. Trump is also signaling that allies should be ready to help keep the strait open. That raises the stakes even further, because once outside powers are drawn into escort missions or naval operations, the line between support and direct involvement becomes much thinner.
You just said it is a little excursion, and you said it is a war. So which one is it?
Well, it's both. It's both. It's an excursion that will keep us out of a war, and the war is going to be, I mean, for them it's a war. For us, it's turned out to be easier than we thought.
Even Trump still sounds unsure about what this war actually is. At one moment, it is described as a limited action. At another moment, it sounds like full-scale war. That kind of confusion matters, because the endgame is still unclear. Is this supposed to be a short operation to pressure Iran? Is it a long campaign to permanently stop Iran's nuclear program? Or is it sliding toward full regime change? Nobody seems to have given a clear answer, and when the objective is unclear, every new strike creates more uncertainty for allies, rivals, and markets. That is one reason China has little incentive to step in. Beijing does not want to inherit the risks of a war whose goals are still undefined, especially when its own economic position is far stronger than Washington would like to admit. And that is where the pressure campaign against China starts to break down. Washington is acting as if Beijing has no choice but to cooperate, but the numbers point in the opposite direction. China's dependence on the United States is much weaker than Trump seems to believe, and that matters a lot in a crisis like this. Even before the war, China's exports were already moving higher. In the first 2 months alone, January and February, exports rose by 22%, already reaching $656 billion. At the same time, China's trade surplus climbed to $213 billion. That is a huge cushion. It shows that Chinese industry is still producing at scale and still finding buyers across the world. Trade with the United States has clearly weakened. In dollar terms, it is down more than 11%. In yuan terms, it is down by almost 17%. The shortfall from the United States is being replaced by stronger trade with other regions, especially across Asia and Europe, where flows are up by 20% or more. Demand is also strengthening across other markets, from the EU to Latin America to Africa. And it is not just volumes going up. Value growth is now outpacing volume growth, which means China is selling more goods and earning more per unit. Even the United States has started buying more again in recent months. So when Washington tries to use pressure, tariffs, or energy disruption as leverage, that leverage is much weaker than before. And then there is the energy side. A lot of people assume that if Hormuz is under pressure, China must be in immediate danger because such a large share of oil moving through the strait goes there. But the structure of China's economy tells a more complicated story. Oil and gas account for less than 5% of China's power generation. That is a very important number. It means the country is far less exposed to this kind of shock than many people assume. So the idea that a Hormuz crisis will force China to rush in and rescue Washington's position does not hold up. Beijing can wait, it can watch, and it can let others absorb more of the damage first. That matters even more once you look at the LNG shock spreading across Asia, because some of China's neighbors are in a much more fragile position. The LNG side of this crisis exposes that gap very quickly. Around 85% of LNG exports go to Asia, so any major disruption in Middle Eastern shipping hits that region first and hardest. On the surface, that should look like a major problem for China because China is the largest LNG importer in the region. But the broader picture tells a different story. The impact on China's economy is near zero as a share of GDP. That is a critical point, because it shows why Beijing is not under the same pressure as many of its neighbors. China can absorb more of this shock without taking the kind of economic hit that would force a rapid policy response. The contrast with other Asian economies is much sharper. Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are in a much more exposed position. Their industries are more vulnerable to gas shortages and higher import costs, and that means the LNG disruption can hit manufacturing, power generation, and economic activity much faster. So while many analysts keep focusing on China's energy imports, the real stress may land much harder on the economies around it. A big reason for that is China's power mix. China relies on coal, nuclear, and renewables on a much larger scale, which gives it more flexibility during an external energy shock. That does not make China immune, but it does make China more resilient than several of the other major manufacturing centers in Asia. And that shifts the balance. In a crisis, the country that falls the least wins. If Korea, Japan, and Taiwan face deeper energy pressure while China stays comparatively stable, then China comes out of this with a stronger relative position in Asian manufacturing and in global manufacturing more broadly. But the risk does not stop there, because another route is now becoming much more important. There is a second choke point coming into focus, the Al-Mandab Strait. Around 6 million barrels a day move through that route, linking the Red Sea to global markets. As Gulf producers try to reroute exports westward to escape pressure in Hormuz, that corridor becomes far more important. That is why the risk is growing so fast. If disruption at Hormuz continues and Al-Mandab also comes under pressure, the numbers become much more serious. Together, that would mean 25 million barrels a day locked out of the market. That is 25% of global oil supply. At that scale, this stops looking like a temporary spike and starts looking like a systemic shock to the world economy. The market impact is already severe. Oil is up 40% year over year. This surge could push headline inflation up by 0.6%, while global growth could fall by 0.3%. and those are still being treated as baseline estimates. If the conflict keeps expanding, the damage could run much deeper.
So can you give us some kind of projection here on how this will impact consumer prices and for how long?
The bottom line is, again, that the reason why futures markets for oil are dropping down towards 60 and even below 50 in the long run is that we expect that if Iran stops being this disruptive terrorist or force in the Middle East, that there'll be a boom in oil production and industrial production.
That also creates a major problem for central banks, especially the Federal Reserve. Earlier hopes for rate cuts in June now look much weaker. If energy stays high and inflation remains under pressure, cuts could be pushed back to September and December instead. That leaves the global economy stuck in a very dangerous position. Tighter financial conditions, slower growth, and rising costs all at once. And once that pressure starts feeding through markets, the dollar system comes into focus as well. Iran is no longer using Hormuz only as a military pressure point. It is turning the strait into a financial weapon as well. The new condition is straightforward. If oil cargo wants safe passage, it has to be traded in RMB, the Chinese yuan. That changes the calculation for every buyer and producer. Countries now face a direct choice between sticking with the dollar and securing access to energy. When energy security is on the line, supply matters more than ideology. One country making the switch may look manageable, but once a major buyer or exporter accepts RMB trade to keep oil moving, others can follow very quickly. That is how a cascade begins. The pressure on the Gulf is especially important here. Saudi Arabia's trade relationship with China shows why. Around 83% of Saudi trade with China is tied to oil exports. That is more than $50 billion a year sitting behind a choke point under pressure. Riyadh needs that revenue to support domestic spending, major development plans, and its long-term transition. If the only practical way to keep volumes flowing is to accept RMB settlement, the incentive becomes very strong. This shift would not be happening in isolation. China and Russia have already de-dollarized nearly 100% of their bilateral trade. Iran is now trying to push that logic directly into the oil trade. So this is pressure on the dollar system itself. If the war drags on, emergency energy trade could accelerate a broader move away from dollar dominance. So the question is simple: will China step in and stabilize the system or let it fracture? And if oil starts trading in yuan at scale, what happens next to the dollar? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.